May 11, 2010. Oliver Reginald Tambo International Airport, Johannesburg. An Airbus A330-202 airliner of Afriqiyah Airways is preparing to make a scheduled flight 8U771 on the Johannesburg-Tripoli route. There are 11 crew members and 93 passengers on board the aircraft. Most of the passengers were Dutch nationals returning from trips to South Africa. The aircraft is operated by an experienced crew. Captain, 57-year-old Youssef Bashir Al-Sadi. A very experienced pilot, he has flown 17,016 hours, 516 of them with an Airbus A330. Co-pilot, 42-year-old Tariq Musa Al-Jawadi, with a total flight time of 4,216 hours. Also in the cockpit was co-pilot trainee, 37-year-old Nazim Al-Tarkuni, who already had experience and flew 1866 hours, 516 of them on the Airbus A330. On May 11 at 1945 Universal Time Coordinated Flight 8U771 took off from Johannesburg and headed for Tripoli. The airliner reached an altitude of 40,000 feet, the entire flight passed without deviations under the control of the autopilot, and no problems were identified by the crew. May 12 at 3:29 the aircraft was identified by the Tripoli Air Traffic Control Center.
Afriqiyah 771, I see you on the radar. Proceed to the Tripoli radio beacon, then descend 3,937 feet, landing on runway 9.
Understood you. We follow to the Tripoli radio beacon. We descend 3937, landing on runway 9 Afriqiyah 771. Report the weather.
Afriqiyah 771, calm wind, visibility 3 miles, clear sky, temperature 19 degrees, dew point 17 degrees Celsius, pressure 1008 HPA.
The information was received by Afriqiyah 771. Permission to descend 8858, Afriqiyah 771.
At 5:58, the crew contacted the tower controller and received clearance to descend to 3,937 feet and clearance to land on runway 09 according to the pattern. On the way to the Tripoli radio beacon, the crew discussed how they would approach the runway. When the landing pattern was selected, the co-pilot immediately activated the procedure in the flight computer, or in aviation language CDU, and immediately began to perform the descent. The co-pilot, in a hurry, makes a mistake and starts descending the plane too early to the Tripoli radio beacon, where the last stage of the landing approach should begin. But other pilots do not notice the errors of the co-pilot. At 0600, Flight 771 passed the Tripoli radio beacon at 984 feet, 196 feet below the prescribed altitude. When the flight approached the decision altitude of 656 feet, to the question of the co-pilot evaluation, the captain replied that the approach was continuing. And this despite the lack of a runway in sight. When already at an altitude of 492 feet, the GPWS signal "too low terrain" is triggered, indicating too low an altitude.
Terrain. Pull up.
The captain, realizing the critical situation, decides to stop the approach and go around. The autopilot was disabled and the engine switched to takeoff. The co-pilot raised his nose to 12.3 degrees while retracting the landing gear and flaps. Soon the airliner, due to a sharp rise, began to quickly lose altitude, after which the co-pilot reduced the pitch angle of the aircraft to 3.5 degrees. But the co-pilot, being under stress, focused on the speed of the aircraft and not on its height. The go-around pitch attitude was not maintained and go-around instructions were not followed. At this time, the aircraft began to rapidly lose speed and altitude, and the co-pilot, with a sharp movement of the side stick, lowered his nose down. The captain then, without warning, took control of the aircraft using the priority button on the side stick and maintained the nose down position while the co-pilot simultaneously pulled the side stick towards himself. At 180 feet, both pilots were already pulling the controls back in an attempt to lift the plane, as they realized the ground was already too close. At 4:01, Flight 771 at an airspeed of 261 knots, approximately 3,937 feet from runway 09, crashed into the ground. Initially, it was reported that the crash claimed the lives of all 104 people on board, but then information appeared about the surviving boy, a citizen of the Netherlands. Soon, one survivor of the crash was confirmed: 9-year-old passenger Ruben van Assau, Dutch. Ruben van Assau, who was found among the wreckage and hospitalized with multiple fractures of both legs. His parents and brother did not survive. The Libyan Civil Aviation Authority, LYCAA, launched an investigation into the causes of the incident, together with representatives of the Airbus company and investigators from the French Bureau of Investigation and Civil Aviation Safety Analysis, BEA. The flight recorders were recovered and sent to Paris for analysis shortly after the accident. On February 28, 2013, the Libyan Civil Aviation Authority announced that they had determined that the crash was the fault of the crew. The landing approach took place in conditions of limited visibility due to thick fog. The crew turned off the autopilot and approached the landing in manual mode, but then decided to go around and turned on the autopilot again, but this decision was made by the pilots too late. During the approach, the pilots did not have a general plan of action, and the continuation of the approach below the minimum decision height occurred without obtaining visual contact with ground references. During the go-around, the pilots did not follow the instructions and simultaneously pulled the steering wheel in different directions. The crew did not control and did not follow the flight path. In this situation, for a safe go-around, the crew needed to correctly follow the instructions, put the engines into takeoff mode by pressing the toggle button to retract the mechanization and landing gear, activate the autopilot and maintain the pitch. If the captain had correctly distributed the duties in the crew, this plane crash would never have happened.